Nobody told you that the pyramids might be a lie. Not a lie in the way conspiracy theorists mean, something far more disturbing. The pyramids you learned about in school, the ones your textbook said were built by thousands of sweating laborers dragging limestone blocks across desert sand, may be the wrong story entirely. Not because someone fabricated history, but because the real builders may have lived and died thousands of years before Egypt even existed. And in 2025, scientists did not just theorize this, they scanned beneath the ground and found something that should not be there, something massive, something engineered, something no civilization of that era was supposed to be capable of building. There is a question that mainstream archaeology has quietly refused to answer for decades. Not because the question is stupid, not because the evidence is thin, but because the answer, if it turns out to be correct, would require rewriting every textbook, every museum exhibit, every university curriculum that deals with the ancient world. The question is this: what if the pyramids of Giza are not the achievement of ancient Egypt? What if they are the inheritance? Think about what that word means. An inheritance, something passed down, something that already existed when the people we call ancient Egyptians arrived on the scene, something older, grander, and built by hands that left almost no trace in the historical record. For decades, researchers who suggested this were laughed out of academic conferences. They were labeled fringe thinkers, conspiracy theorists, wishful dreamers. But here's where the story begins to change, because the data coming out of Giza in 2025 is not the work of fringe thinkers. It is the work of engineers, satellite imaging experts, and university-affiliated scientists armed with technology that did not exist 10 years ago. And what they found beneath the pyramids is rewriting the conversation entirely. In March 2025, an interdisciplinary team of researchers announced a groundbreaking discovery beneath Egypt's Giza Plateau, a vast complex of underground chambers and shafts extending nearly 2 kilometers under the famous pyramids. Read that again. 2 kilometers underground, beneath structures that mainstream history already struggles to explain at the surface level. The team included Professor Corrado Malanga of the University of Pisa, Dr. Filippo Biondi of the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, and researcher Armando May. They presented their findings to an audience of over 1,000 delegates, live-streamed as a lengthy press conference on YouTube, under the name the Khafre Research Project SAR Technology. This was not a whisper shared in a dark corner of the internet. This was a formal scientific presentation, and what they revealed that day has not been fully processed by the public, because the implications are almost too large to absorb. The technology they used is called synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography. The name sounds dense, but the concept is revolutionary. It works by detecting microscopic surface vibrations, analyzing micromovements generated by background seismic waves, and transforming radar signals into phononic information capable of detecting millimetric vibrations deep below the surface, essentially allowing the team to see underground without drilling a single hole. This is not mystical. This is engineering, the same class of technology used to monitor volcanoes and detect underground seismic activity. Except here, it was pointed at one of the most famous sites on Earth, and what came back in the data was not what anyone expected. Using this SAR tomography approach, the team scanned the Khafre pyramid and uncovered what appears to be an underground system stretching 2 kilometers beneath all 3 major pyramids. The findings detail 5 identical multi-level structures connected by geometric passageways near the base of the Khafre pyramid. 5 identical structures connected by geometric pathways. This is not a natural geological formation. Identical, repeating geometric architecture does not occur in nature, and the complexity does not stop there. According to the researchers, 8 massive hollow cylinders descend vertically from the base of the Khafre pyramid, each containing a central column wrapped in perfect helical coils. These shafts terminate in 2 enormous cubic chambers, each measuring 260 by 260 by 260 feet, larger than most modern sports arenas. Larger than sports arenas, buried nearly 650 meters beneath the desert floor, arranged in a pattern that could only have been designed. And this is where everything changes, because the question is no longer just what is down there. The question becomes who built it and when. To answer that, we have to go back. Not to the pharaohs, not to the Old Kingdom. We have to go back to a period that most historians treat as myth, a period that the ancient Egyptians themselves referred to in their sacred texts. They called it Zep Tepi. It translates roughly as the first time. Fringe historians, including Graham Hancock and geologist Robert Schoch, have argued that Zep Tepi was not symbolic, but a real historical era, a period when an advanced civilization existed on Earth, roughly 12,000 years ago, long before the rise of dynastic Egypt. For years, this was dismissed, but the geological evidence has been building quietly and steadily, and it is now becoming very difficult to ignore. Consider the Great Sphinx, the most iconic statue in the world. standing guard on the Giza Plateau with a gaze that has endured for thousands of years. Official history tells us it was built around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But look more carefully at the Sphinx, not at its face, at its body, at the deep vertical erosion marks carved into its enclosure walls. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, examined the Sphinx and noticed something that conventional explanations cannot easily dismiss. The erosion pattern on its enclosure walls was not caused by wind and sand, the typical forces that shape desert monuments, but by water. The Giza Plateau has not experienced heavy, sustained rainfall for at least 7,000 years. Schoch concluded that the erosion on the Sphinx must date back to a period of heavy rainfall, possibly between 7,000 BCE and 9,000 BCE, which would make the Sphinx at least 9,000 years old, twice as old as the oldest pyramid and far beyond the accepted birth of Egyptian civilization. Think about what that means. If the Sphinx is 9,000 years old at minimum, and some researchers now push that figure far higher, then it was already ancient when the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty were alive. It was already a relic, already eroded, already a monument from a forgotten world. The Great Sphinx of Giza shows signs of water erosion from heavy rain, yet it has not rained in Egypt between roughly 5000 BC and 3000 BC. This suggests the entire site was already ancient and worn from the elements at the very start of ancient Egyptian civilization in 3100 BC. The pharaohs did not build the Sphinx. They inherited it. And if they inherited the Sphinx, what else did they inherit? Independent researcher Antonio Ambrosio of the Autonomous University of Barcelona has put forward a theory that the 3 main pyramids of Giza may be up to 12,000 years old, predating the Egyptian era by millennia. According to his analysis, the pyramids of Giza were not built by the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, but were appropriated by them. Subsequent pyramids, built later by those same dynasties, would represent imperfect attempts to imitate pre-existing structures they could no longer fully understand or replicate. That last point is devastating, and most people walk past it without stopping. The Egyptians built dozens of pyramids after Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Not a single one of them comes close in precision, scale, or engineering mastery. Every pyramid built afterward was cruder, smaller, less perfectly aligned. A civilization that was supposed to be getting better at building pyramids was actually getting progressively worse at it. There's only one logical explanation for that trajectory. The later pharaohs were not advancing a technology. They were attempting to copy a technology they did not fully understand, one that was handed down to them from somewhere, or someone else. But here's where it gets worse, because the anomalies are not confined to Egypt. Researchers have pointed to megalithic structures around the world that share eerily similar construction characteristics, including the ancient Incan stronghold of Sacsayhuaman in Peru and the vast stone platforms of Baalbek in Lebanon, both known for their enormous, precisely cut blocks that modern engineers struggle to explain. The stones at Baalbek in Lebanon include individual blocks weighing more than 1,900 tons. One unfinished block, still partially embedded in the quarry, is estimated at over 1,750 tons. No crane system available today could lift that block in one piece. No construction method currently known could explain how it was moved, shaped, and placed with millimeter-level precision. And yet, there it sits, as real as the ground beneath your feet, silent, unexplained. What most people are not seeing is the pattern. These sites are not just individually mysterious, they are collectively impossible to explain under the current model of human history. That model says civilization began roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, that before that, humans lived in small nomadic bands with no capacity for large-scale engineering. And yet the physical evidence, carved in stone and spread across 5 continents, tells a fundamentally different story. A story of a civilization so advanced that its ruins dwarf what we built for thousands of years afterward. A civilization that vanished. A civilization that left behind only its greatest works, and no manual for reading them. And now in 2025, we are finally beginning to read them. The underground discovery at Giza is only one piece of a rapidly assembling puzzle, because at the same time, researchers were scanning beneath the pyramids with satellite radar. Something equally significant was happening at Saqqara, about 30 kilometers south of Giza. This is the site of the Step Pyramid of Djoser, Egypt's oldest large-scale stone structure, built around 2670 BCE. It has long been considered the beginning of pyramid construction, the starting point, the first attempt. But a peer-reviewed study published in PLOS 1 is now suggesting that the Step Pyramid was not built the way anyone thought. The study proposes that the Step Pyramid of Djoser was built using a hydraulic lift system capable of raising approximately 100 tons of stone, completely overturning the 4,700-year consensus on Saqqara construction technology. Not ramps, not armies of laborers dragging limestone under the desert sun. Water, engineered, controlled, precise. At the heart of the theory is a massive structure many archaeologists had previously dismissed as ceremonial or unfinished, the Gisr el-Mudir, a rectangular stone enclosure predating the pyramid itself. Researchers now propose this structure functioned as a check dam designed to trap sediment and regulate water flow from the nearby Abu Sir Wadi, ensuring a steady supply of water to power the hydraulic system used to lift the stones. A dam, built before the pyramid, built to feed water into a system that would then float enormous stone blocks upward through the pyramid's central shafts. The hydraulic lift mechanism, as described in the study, appears revolutionary for building stone structures and finds no parallel anywhere else in our civilization. Those are the words from the published research itself. No parallel anywhere else in our civilization. Meaning this is not an incremental advance on existing Egyptian technology. It is a leap so large that it suggests whoever designed the system was working from a knowledge base that should not have existed at that point in human history. The advanced geotechnical design of the system suggests a technical tradition that extended well beyond what we previously attributed to this period. Where did this tradition come from? If the Step Pyramid was Egypt's first major stone structure, how did its builders already possess advanced hydraulic engineering knowledge? Technologies of this sophistication are not invented in a single generation. They are developed over centuries, through trial and error, through institutional knowledge passed across generations, which means the people who built the Step Pyramid learned this from someone who came before them, and the people who came before them have no name in any history book. According to informed sources in the archaeological and geophysical communities, the real debate is not whether these structures exist. The radar data is real. The geological evidence is real. The engineering anomalies are real. The real debate is about what allowed them to exist. And that debate is one that official institutions have been extraordinarily reluctant to have in public. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has repeatedly blocked or delayed requests for excavation at Giza. The Khafre project team has reportedly expressed interest in excavating the site, but Egypt's government has long been cautious about approving digs that challenge its official stance on the pyramid's historical purpose. This is not a bureaucratic delay. This is a policy, a conscious choice to control access to the most significant archaeological site on the planet at the moment in history when the technology exists to finally understand what is truly buried there. What most people are not seeing is that the suppression of archaeological inquiry at Giza is itself evidence. Not evidence of ancient aliens, not evidence of a secret government cover-up in the Hollywood sense, but evidence of institutional fear. Fear of what happens to national identity, religious frameworks, funding structures, and academic careers when the foundational narrative of human civilization is overturned. The Egyptian state has built an entire tourism economy, generating billions of dollars annually, on the story that its ancient ancestors built the most magnificent structures in human history. If those structures were built by someone else, the story changes. The identity changes, the power changes, and institutions built on stories do not give up their stories easily, but the data keeps coming. And it does not care about institutional comfort. The most recent synthesis of the evidence, pulling together the radar findings beneath Giza, the hydraulic engineering at Saqqara, the geological water erosion on the Sphinx, and the comparative analysis of megalithic sites across the globe, points toward a single, coherent, deeply unsettling conclusion. There was a civilization before the one we call ancient Egypt. It was technologically advanced in ways we are only beginning to understand. It built structures, underground networks, surface monuments, water management systems that were so far beyond its supposed contemporaries that they remain, thousands of years later, unexplained by the civilization that followed. And then it disappeared, not gradually, not through slow decline, but rapidly, as if something happened to it, something catastrophic, something global. The ancient Egyptians remembered this, and they wrote it into their religious cosmology as Zep Tepi, the first time, and described it as an era when gods walked the earth and civilization was perfected. Some researchers propose that Zep Tepi could represent a forgotten chapter of civilization, possibly predating recorded Egyptian history, a theory partially informed by geological and archaeoastronomical studies. What the Egyptians called gods may have been the surviving knowledge holders of a pre-catastrophe civilization, individuals or groups who retained enough technical and astronomical knowledge to pass the framework of their lost world on to the next generation of builders. The pyramids in this reading are not tombs, they are transmissions. Physical records encoded in stone, geometry, and astronomical alignment left by a vanishing civilization for whatever came next. And what came next did not fully understand the message. The 4th Dynasty Egyptians who carved their names into the pyramids of Giza, who placed the cartouche of Khufu inside the Great Pyramid, may have been doing what humans always do when they encounter something too magnificent to fully explain. They claimed it. They incorporated it into their own story. They said, "This is ours." But ownership is not the same as authorship. This is not chaos. This is strategy. a strategy embedded in stone and mathematics, and the precise alignment of structures with star systems that the builders should not have been able to calculate. The three pyramids of Giza are aligned with extraordinary precision to the belt stars of the constellation Orion, matching their position in the sky not as it appeared in 2500 BCE, but as it appeared in approximately 10,500 BCE, a date that corresponds precisely with the end of the last ice age, with global catastrophe, with the period when a sufficiently advanced civilization could have been wiped from the surface of the earth and left only its hardest, most permanent works behind. If true, this would mean the builders had advanced knowledge of astronomy, cycles of precession, and architectural precision that modern science only rediscovered in recent centuries. Think about what that means at a civilizational scale. We are not talking about clever ancient people who figured out how to stack rocks. We are talking about a society that understood the 26,000-year precession cycle of the Earth's axis, that could calculate where specific stars would appear in the sky 10 millennia in the future, that could build structures so precisely calibrated to those calculations that we can still read the astronomical message today from the ground with modern telescopes. This level of knowledge does not appear from nowhere. It accumulates. It requires generations of observation, documentation, and institutional transmission. It requires, in other words, a civilization, structured, literate, scientifically literate civilization that we have no name for and no record of. The real story, the one mainstream media is not fully telling, is that 2025 has become a pivotal year in this investigation. Multiple independent lines of inquiry, using entirely different technologies and disciplines, have converged on the same general conclusion at the same time. Radar imaging beneath Giza, hydraulic engineering analysis at Saqqara, geological dating of Sphinx erosion, architectural comparisons across global megalithic sites, astronomical alignment analysis, all of them pointing toward a pre-Egyptian technological tradition so sophisticated that it left fingerprints on every continent and in the deepest layers of rock beneath the most famous structures ever built. And the world has barely noticed. Because the findings are scattered across different scientific journals, different research teams, different countries and disciplines. No single institution has connected the dots in a way that forces the question into the center of public discourse. The discovery beneath Giza was presented in Italy. The hydraulic study at Saqqara was published in a scientific journal not widely read outside of engineering circles. The geological dating of the Sphinx has been debated in academic papers for 30 years without ever achieving mainstream acknowledgement. What you are reading right now is the assembled picture, the picture that emerges when you stop looking at the pieces separately and step back to see the whole shape. And the shape is extraordinary. The shape is a civilization, coherent, global, technically masterful, and catastrophically erased. What erased it? The geological record suggests several candidates. Myths from Sumer, India, and Mesoamerica speak of golden ages, sky gods, and great floods that wiped away entire worlds. Native American and Aboriginal legends remember ancestors from the stars who built stone cities and vanished. These are not coincidences. Traditions, separated by oceans and languages, do not independently invent the same memory of a world-destroying catastrophe and a civilization that preceded it without that memory corresponding to something real. Something happened approximately 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. The sea levels rose by more than 120 meters globally as the ice sheets collapsed. Coastlines were redrawn. Entire landmasses were submerged. Any coastal civilization, which is where sophisticated civilizations naturally tend to develop, near water and trade routes, would have been wiped from the map. Not metaphorically, literally submerged beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. What remained were the inland works, the monuments built not on coastlines, but on elevated plateaus. Giza is on a plateau. Saqqara is on a plateau. Sacsayhuaman is in the mountains. Baalbek is in the highlands. The survivors, if there were survivors, carried their knowledge into the hills and waited. And eventually they passed what they remembered to the next civilizations that rose from the wreckage of the catastrophe. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Indus Valley people, the Olmec. They all emerged within a relatively short window, approximately 3,000 to 5,000 years after the catastrophe. And they all emerge with what appears to be inherited knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, writing, monumental architecture, appearing in their cultures not as gradual developments, but as sudden gifts, appearing nearly fully formed at the very beginning of their recorded histories. This is not how technology develops. Technology develops slowly, clumsily, with failed attempts and dead ends visible in the archaeological record. But what we see at the birth of the great ancient civilizations is sophistication arriving almost immediately, as if they were not inventing it, as if they were remembering it. The underground structures beneath Giza, now mapped by satellite radar at depths that were previously invisible to any available technology, are the most tangible physical evidence yet discovered of the infrastructure that may have belonged to this pre-catastrophe world. Researcher Filippo Biondi stated plainly, "The pyramids are just the tip of the iceberg. They're merely a capstone to something much larger beneath the surface. The real structure is below." Below, beneath the pyramids, we have spent centuries studying, photographing, and measuring. Beneath the tombs, we thought we understood. Below all of that, a structure more massive than anything visible above ground. A structure that was not built as an accessory to the pyramids. A structure that the pyramids may have been built on top of, or as a marker for, or as a cover over. The geometry of what the radar found is precise, deliberate, mathematical. 8 vertical cylindrical shafts descending in perfect parallel alignment to a depth of 648 meters, terminating in 2 cubic chambers of identical dimensions, connected by a network of geometric passageways to 5 additional multi-level structures located near the pyramid's base. This is engineering. This is planning. This requires blueprints, advanced surveying technology, material science, and an institutional capacity to execute a multi-generational construction project on a scale that rivals anything built in the modern era. And it is sitting right now at a depth of more than half a kilometer beneath one of the most studied archaeological sites in human history, waiting for someone with the courage to open the access shaft. Egypt has not yet granted permission to excavate. The reasons given are procedural, jurisdictional, methodological. But the real story, according to informed researchers within the archaeological community, is simpler and more uncomfortable than that. The moment a single drill breaks through to one of those chambers, the entire edifice of conventional historical understanding comes under immediate and irresistible pressure. Because what they find, whether it is empty rooms, artifacts of an unknown culture, engineering mechanisms, inscriptions in an unrecognized script, or technology that should not exist, whatever it is, it will demand an explanation. And the only explanation that fits the accumulated evidence is the one that was called impossible for decades. Something was here before us. Something that built at scales we cannot explain, with precision we cannot replicate, using methods we are only now beginning to reverse engineer. Something that understood the cosmos well enough to encode it in stone monuments designed to last for tens of thousands of years. And something that disappeared so completely, so rapidly and so totally, that it left almost nothing behind except its architecture. Architecture that we have been living in the shadow of for centuries, without fully understanding what we were looking at. The question that nobody is answering, the question that sits at the center of every radar scan, every geological study, every astronomical alignment analysis, is not whether this civilization existed. The evidence for its existence is now too substantial, too varied, too independently verified to dismiss. The question is, what happened to it? And more urgently, more immediately, more personally for every person alive on this planet in 2026, if a civilization that advanced can vanish so completely and so suddenly that we spent all of recorded history not even knowing it existed, what does that tell us about the durability of our own? Because here's the thing about what is buried under the pyramids. It is not just a mystery about the past, it is a warning about the future. A civilization capable of building underground networks 2 kilometers deep and surface monuments aligned with 10,000-year astronomical precision did not lack intelligence. It did not lack engineering. It did not lack sophistication. And it is gone. Completely. Without a dynasty, without a language we can read, without a culture we can trace. Only its hardest works remain. And those works are so impressive that when the next civilizations rose from the catastrophe and found them, they incorporated them into their own mythology as the work of gods. There are now active proposals within the research community to use even more powerful scanning technologies, muon tomography, which was used in 2017 to detect a previously unknown void inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu, to map the full extent of what the SAR data has outlined. The team has expressed intent to share their data with the broader scientific community, and plans to host a workshop or conference to which geophysicists, Egyptologists, and engineers will be invited to scrutinize the radar analysis in detail. The raw data sets may eventually be made available for independent verification. A documentary is reportedly in development. The conversation is accelerating. But the excavation, the physical opening of those chambers, remains blocked. And until that blockade lifts, the most important archaeological discovery of this century sits sealed beneath the sand, its silence more eloquent than anything yet written about it. It waited 12,000 years. It can wait a little longer. The question is whether we have the courage to go down there when the time finally comes, and whether we are ready for what we find. Because one thing is now almost certain. Whatever is beneath those pyramids was not built by the civilization we call ancient Egypt. It was built by something that came before, something that mastered the physical world in ways we are still struggling to comprehend, something that encoded its own existence into the most durable medium available, stone, mathematics, and the movements of stars, and buried the deepest part of itself far enough underground that it would survive even a global catastrophe. The pyramids were never just tombs. They were never just monuments. They were never just impressive architecture built to glorify a king. They are the most visible surface layer of a buried world. And what that world was, who built it, how it fell, and what it left behind for us to find, those questions are no longer the domain of fringe historians and alternative researchers. They are, as of 2025, active scientific investigations backed by satellite data, peer-reviewed publications, and university-affiliated researchers whose work cannot be dismissed. The surface has been studied for centuries. The answers were never going to come from the surface. They were always going to come from below. And below, something is waiting. The only question left is whether the world is ready to hear what it has to say.